This was the strangest case I'd ever seen. A 100-year-old man vanished without a trace. When the cops found him, he was bricked into a wall. The room was filled with countless colorful butterflies, obscuring most of the evidence at the scene. The only apparent clue pointed to suicide. Years later, a similar case occurred, and I finally began to see the whole picture. But the horrifying truth was far more desperate than I could have imagined. October 21, 2023, 2 a.m. The White Creek Town Police Station got a call. A villager from north of town reported a supernatural event, claiming he'd seen a ghost. That night, the villager had been drinking with some buddies from the village. On his way home, he stopped to relieve himself in a small patch of woods. Half drunk, he heard a thump sound. Hearing it in the dead of night, and feeling brave from the alcohol, he followed the sound. It was coming from the village square. Then, he saw something he'd never forget. In the center of the square, there was a kneeling, human-shaped statue called Repentance, and it was making a dull, thudding noise. Quick and rhythmic, like the statue was repeatedly bowing its head to the ground. The air filled with a rotten smell, and the statue's color slowly turned a thick black, as if something was about to burst out. Seeing this, the villager sobered up instantly and ran for his life. Back home, he thought it over and finally called the police. The local cops responded immediately and rushed to the scene. After investigating, they found out the supernatural phenomenon the villager saw was actually a person trapped inside the statue, struggling. As for the statue changing color, it was because the person inside had died, and their decomposing body was leaking fluids. The poor lighting made it look like it was turning black. But even though that explained some of the supernatural aspects, more questions arose. How did the deceased get trapped inside the perfectly sealed statue? And even if they died, how could a body decompose in minutes? Soon, my homicide division took over the case. I went with Captain Miller to examine the scene. The square was cordoned off with police tape. The statue was temporarily covered by a tent, and the officers on guard had strange expressions, glancing inside from time to time. They seemed wary and scared. I had a bad feeling. Captain Miller showed his badge. The officer on duty hesitated, then finally warned us, "You two be careful. That statue is unsettling." Captain Miller nodded and stepped inside. I followed him. The moment I stepped into the tent, a dense, bizarre array of colors hit my eyes. The whole statue looked like it was covered in a diseased rash. Countless butterflies enveloped the entire statue. Maybe it was my imagination, but for a split second, it felt like all the butterflies turned their eyes and stared right at us. I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. An indescribable sense of familiarity washed over me. Why? Why was this happening again? The nightmare that had tormented me day and night for 20 years magnified in that instant, threatening to drag me back to that horrifying night. A coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. Startled, the butterflies swirled up in a dazzling gust of color and vanished into the dense woods nearby. My legs went weak, and I almost collapsed. No, it can't be. Sam, what's wrong? Captain Miller quickly steadied me. I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead, trying to calm myself. Nothing, Captain. Any findings? Captain Miller looked startled for a moment, then said, "This case. It reminds me of the first death investigation I was on, 20 years ago, right after I got out of the academy." My heart sank, but I asked, "What case was that?" It was a very strange suicide. Captain Miller lit a cigarette. The location was also that village. A 100-year-old man disappeared without a trace. After searching for days, we found his body in a local villager's house. The body was bricked into the wall of a storage room. The human-shaped stain from his leaking fluids was covered in colorful butterflies. The storage room had been locked for a long time, covered in dust. The only footprints and fingerprints found at the scene belonged to the deceased. Captain Miller looked troubled. All the evidence indicated that, for a short period, the deceased was the only one in the house. I looked at him in disbelief. Alone? Could someone really brick themselves into a wall? It's hard to imagine, I know, but that's what the evidence showed. Captain Miller sighed. We also considered if someone had faked the fingerprints and footprints. But inside the wall, there were fingerprints from the deceased struggling, matching the ones at the scene. And the estimated weight from the depth of the footprints was very close to the old man's. Everything pointed to suicide. Then, Captain Miller casually added, "Come to think of it, the deceased back then was also named Sam, just like you." I scratched my head and forced a laugh, brushing it off. Just then, Captain Miller's phone rang. After a brief call, he said we needed to head back to the station. "They've ID'd the victim?" I instinctively asked, "A local from North?" "No." Captain Miller's expression was odd. "Preliminary examination indicates the deceased is a male, between 40 and 50 years old. And the ME found half a business card in the clothing, wrapped in decomposed flesh, that confirms his identity." He looked at me and said, word by word, "His name is Sam." "What?" I exclaimed, then couldn't help but confirm, "Sam. Sam." Captain Miller, lost in thought, nodded silently. Then he floored it, speeding up. Sitting next to Captain Miller, my heart pounded like a drum, and my hands and feet were clammy with cold sweat. The victims in both cases were named Sam. As much as I didn't want to admit it, I had to face it. Both victims had the same name as me. Was this really a coincidence? Back at the station, I pretended to go to the restroom and called my mom. "Mom, are you guys having a good time in Florida?" "It's great, much warmer here than back home." My mom asked, "You calling all of a sudden, is something wrong?" I glanced around, then lowered my voice. "Dad's been with you the whole time these past few days, right? He hasn't come back?" "No, we've been together the whole time." "And? Has he been acting weird at all?" I asked. "What kind of question is that?" My mom sounded surprised. "Do you need to talk to him?" "I can get him." No, it's nothing." I felt a little calmer. "I just mean, since everything's fine at home, you guys can stay and enjoy your vacation a bit longer." After hanging up, I went to the conference room. Captain Miller was assigning tasks. Most of the other colleagues had their assignments and were leaving. Finally, it was just me and Captain Miller. I asked, "Captain, what do you need me to do?" Captain Miller didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, "Sam, that case from 20 years ago. Do you really think the victim committed suicide?" I was silent for a moment, choosing my words carefully. "Doesn't really seem like it. The victims in these two cases not only have the same name, but they also died in the exact same place. What are your thoughts on that?" Captain Miller turned to look at me. I had a bad feeling again, but I forced myself to say, assuming it wasn't suicide, but murder. Then maybe the killer has a grudge against someone named Sam? And that's twisted them psychologically, making them take it out on other people named Sam. Captain Miller nodded slightly. And what about the location?" "The location? Both there." I pondered for a moment. "I can't think of any other reason." "Can't think of one, or you're deliberately hiding something?" Captain Miller stood up and threw a file folder on the table in front of me. "The location can be even more precise. The two victims died in the exact same spot." Without thinking, I immediately retorted, "Impossible. They can't be exactly the same." Captain Miller slammed his hand on the table. "The first murder happened at a villager's house. The following year, that family moved away. Later, when the village built the public square, their house was voluntarily demolished for a low price. The spot where that statue stands in the square now? That's exactly where the first murder took place. Hearing this, my mind went blank. How could I not know that? You don't know? Disappointment flickered in Captain Miller's eyes. The family I just mentioned, the one whose house was demolished. That was your family's house, Sam. How could you not know? At this point, what else are you trying to hide? Speak. I really didn't know. I quickly explained. 20 years ago, after that incident, my parents thought the place was bad luck, so they moved us away. Since then, I've never been back to the village. Not once, until this investigation. Captain Miller pressed on, why not go back? Yeah, it was my hometown, where my ancestors had lived for generations. Even if something unlucky happened, it wasn't normal to never go back. So why hadn't I? Because there were some secrets I was destined to never share with anyone. I knew about the demolition, but I didn't know the statue was on the exact site of our old storage room. 20 years can change a lot. Coming back there, I didn't recognize it at first. I let out a heavy breath. I just didn't want to go back. Then why did you hide the fact that the first murder happened at your house? Captain Miller wouldn't let it go. I remained silent, avoiding his gaze. Captain Miller stared hard at me for a long moment, then finally snorted. Sam, I don't think you're currently fit to continue on this investigation. I'm putting you on leave. Take some time off. I didn't argue, I accepted. After work, watching the endless stream of people, I found myself drawn to the bus station. I got on a bus and went to the village square. I stood before that statue named Repentance. By now, the statue had been dismantled, only half of its broken form remaining, teetering, like dust about to be swept away by the tide of history. That night, 20 years ago, I was just an 8-year-old kid. If I'd had a choice, I definitely wouldn't have gotten up to use the bathroom. If I hadn't gotten up, I wouldn't have seen what I saw. If I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have spent these 20 years trapped by it, a self-made prison. Too bad there are no ifs. At that thought, the memories buried deep inside me surged forth, impossible to hold back any longer. 20 years ago, in 2003. About a week before the suicide of the 100-year-old man. I'd drunk too much water that day and got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. I heard rustling sounds coming from the storage room. I thought, could it be a thief? So, I grabbed a sickle, crept quietly towards the storage room, planning to peek through a crack in the door. If I saw a stranger, I'd wake my parents immediately. But I tried the doorknob a couple of times, it wouldn't turn. It must have been locked. I'd always been a brave kid, so I went around outside and peeked into the storage room through the window. In the faint moonlight, I could see half of my dad's body. I heard Dad seeming to talk to someone, but the window was closed, so I couldn't hear clearly. From his muffled tone, I could vaguely sense that Dad wasn't in a good mood. The person Dad was talking to was completely hidden in the darkness, their voice very low. I couldn't see or hear them. They argued for a bit, then Dad left the storage room. I stood outside the window, completely puzzled. My memory of what happened next is fragmented. I don't remember it clearly, only vaguely that the person Dad was talking to seemed to notice me. He said something to me. Just that one sentence filled me with an immense fear, a feeling that became ingrained in my very being, impossible to erase. But for the life of me, I couldn't remember what he said. It was utterly indescribable. A few days later, word spread through the village that an elderly man, an outsider, had gone missing. Police cars rolled into the village, searching everywhere. Finally, they found the old man's body inside the wall of our storage room. The case was closed as a suicide. As for how it happened, no one knew. I was sure Dad had something to do with it. But I was scared. If Dad had really killed the old man, he would get the death penalty. Not only would I lose my father, but our family would lose its main provider. So, I chose to keep silent. Even though I was young, I understood right from wrong. I knew this was wrong, and the shame from this mistake grew and festered. This led me, when it was time for college entrance exams, to resolutely apply to the police academy and work hard to become a detective. I volunteered for the most dangerous fieldwork, fighting criminals, upholding justice, hoping to alleviate the guilt I felt for possibly harboring a murderer. Over time, that case became my untouchable dark side. Even after leaving, I resisted going back. Of course, I couldn't help but try to investigate that case, deep down hoping there was more to it, as there were many suspicious points. For example, I clearly saw Dad in the storage room, so why were there no traces of him there? Sigh. I let out a breath and prepared to leave. Just then, I suddenly saw, in a corner inside the statue, a line of crooked handwriting: "Do not investigate this case." Could the deceased have left it in their final moments? A voice came from behind me: "Young man, are you Sam?" The speaker was a man in his 50s or 60s. Though aged, I recognized him. He was the village chief. When my dad was the chief, this man was the village accountant. I knew his face. When I nodded, the village chief smiled. "Saw your back, thought you looked like old John. You're definitely his son." "Uncle, long time no see," I greeted him. The village chief nodded slightly and sighed. "It's a shame about this statue. Your dad was the one who had it built, you know." "My dad had it built?" My heart skipped a beat. The village chief looked puzzled. "Yeah, didn't you know? He never mentioned it." I shook my head. Seeing my interest, the village chief explained, "Back then, before your dad moved your family away, the village was already planning to build this public square. Even though I ended up leading most of the work later, your dad put in a lot of effort. This statue, for example, he paid for it out of his own pocket and had an artist create it." I began to examine the statue closely. It was a male figure, kneeling, head bowed to the ground. The base read "Repentance." I couldn't help but ask, "Uncle, why did my dad want a statue like this?" "Oh, that." The village chief chuckled. "After that whole incident, he said he was taking you and your mom away, and probably wouldn't be back much. Your dad's a man with deep ties to his homeland. This was where his ancestors lived, after all. He felt he'd let them down. So, he had this repentance statue made, hoping his ancestors would forgive him." After leaving, I went home. Since I was on leave, I had a lot of free time. I spent some time and found the artist who made the statue. His explanation for why my dad commissioned it was the same as the village chief's. It made sense, but I still felt something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The first case, the victim was in my family's old house. The second case, the victim was in the statue. The place of death was identical. Many of the clues seemed to point to my dad. I felt uneasy and fell into a pattern of insomnia and anxiety. A week later, my parents returned from their Florida trip. I finally mustered the courage to confront my dad, even preparing for the worst. "Dad, I've been investigating a case recently, the statue in the village square." "Sam, come have some tea." Dad interrupted me, then asked instead, "Tell me, son, have you ever done anything you regret?" Hearing that question, the first thing that popped into my head was what happened 20 years ago. But the words died on my lips. "No, nothing." Dad looked at me intently for a moment, then said good a few times and drank his tea in one gulp. "I hope you can always make the right choices, son." With that, he left, leaving me completely bewildered. He left, and never came back. My dad killed himself. Dad's body was found by the river. When they found him, he was already badly bloated, a horrifying sight. At the same time, the authorities received an anonymous letter. The person accused was my dad, Tom. It said that when he was village chief, he colluded with contractors to embezzle village construction funds. I saw that letter. The handwriting was all too familiar. It was my dad's. In other words, he killed himself out of guilt. Could it be that when we talked that day, and I mentioned the statue, Dad thought I'd found out about his embezzlement? He didn't want to make things difficult for me, so he... Thinking about it, I couldn't bear to go on. After this happened, my dad's previously decent reputation in the village was completely ruined. In public square, that broken repentant statue became a joke overnight. The villagers all said he'd stolen their money, that he had a guilty conscience. They were all neighbors, many of them relatives. Doing something like this meant being cursed by the ancestors. With things like this, even if Mom and I wanted to go back to village, we felt too ashamed. But Mom still went back to the village behind my back, knelt before the villagers, and begged for their forgiveness. I knew she did it for me. The son's a cop, the father's a corrupt official. I can only imagine how many people were talking behind our backs. For the rest of my life, whenever I thought of Dad, the twisted handwriting from inside the statue would flash in my mind: do not investigate this case. That sentence was a warning for me. If I hadn't investigated the body in the statue, Dad wouldn't have misunderstood. And then, he wouldn't have killed himself. I drove my dad to his death. The irony was, the case of the body in the statue was eventually dropped due to lack of evidence. In endless regret, I numbed myself with intense work. For years, I solved one major case after another. Correspondingly, my rank kept rising. After becoming a captain, I had several opportunities to transfer to a desk job, but I turned them all down. As a detective, I had to do the most dangerous frontline fieldwork. Even if I died one day, it would be a release for me. Until 20 years passed. When I was 48, my dead-end life took another turn. That nightmarish case reappeared. Many years passed, and village changed a lot. Located in the suburbs near the city center, its prime location caught the eye of developers, and it was turned into a tourist resort. The original spot of the repentant statue was now inside a villa. Looking at the all-too-familiar human-shaped oily stain on the kitchen wall, I trembled all over, my heart pounding. Colorful butterflies fluttered chaotically. The medical examiner, who was processing the body, said, "Captain Sam, the smell is pretty strong. Why don't you step out for a bit? We'll call you when we're done." I took a deep breath and asked, "Is there anything on the deceased that can prove their identity?" The me shook his head. "Nothing so far." Lost in thought, I leaned in closer and carefully examined the inside of the wall. Sure enough, in a corner caked with rotten flesh, were two crookedly written words: "Resign." Was this also a warning? I immediately ordered the other officers, "Check right away if anyone named Sam has gone missing in the area." Huh? An officer looked completely bewildered. "You heard me right, Sam." I paused, then continued, "Same name as me." The officers left one by one. When no one was looking, I discreetly took a small tissue sample from the deceased. After work that day, I went to the hospital. I had a wild, unbelievable theory in my mind that needed verification. These past few days, the ME's office had been working around the clock. From the victim's skeletal remains and tissue, they'd gathered a lot of useful information. The deceased was a male, between 60 and 70 years old. As for whether his name was Sam, that wasn't confirmed. We hadn't found any recent missing persons reports for anyone named Sam. In the case 20 years ago, the victim was around 40 to 50. 20 years later, in this current case, the victim is around 60 to 70. The age difference between them is roughly 20 years. 20. It seemed to be a very significant number. But going back, 40 years ago, when I was 8, the victim in that case was a 100-year-old man. This pattern seemed to be broken. While I was out, I went to the hospital to pick up a test report. After seeing the results, I finally made a decision. After burning the report, I returned to the station. Under my superior's confused gaze, I handed in my resignation letter. What I picked up from the hospital was a DNA comparison report. The two samples compared were mine and the deceased's. The test proved it, our DNA was identical. In other words, the person who died wasn't just someone with the same name as me. It was a 60 to 70-year-old me. Me from 20 years in the future. My future self. I didn't know how this was possible, but I didn't want to repeat my past mistakes. At 28, I hadn't listened to the warning, and it led to Dad's suicide. Now, I was going to listen. Even if my resignation was rejected, I wasn't going to work anymore. As quickly as possible, I took my mom and left the city. I settled in a coastal city and found a job as a security consultant. 2 years passed like that, and nothing bad happened. In fact, things were looking up. I was 50 now. I'd dedicated so much of my life to the police force, and because of the nature of my work, I'd never found a partner. I'd given up hope, but then I met the right person. I met my current wife. We got married, and together we adopted a daughter, named Mandy. She was a very obedient child. This was the happiest time of my life. If I could die like this, I'd be content. But unfortunately, fate wouldn't let me depart peacefully. It still had to play with me. The year Mandy went to college, my mom passed away peacefully. It was just me and my wife left in the house. My wife suggested visiting my hometown. I agreed. Of course, I had a selfish reason. In a few months, I would be 68. The third 20-year cycle was approaching. If the pattern held, would an 80 or 90-year-old me appear with a warning? After leaving my hometown, I'd lost touch with many people. I brought my wife back and visited many old friends. Many had already passed away. It gave me a strong sense of how much things had changed and people were gone. When I asked the police department about old Captain Miller, I received terrible news. Director Miller was retaliated against by a criminal organization over 10 years ago. He died heroically and is buried in 5 Grains Mountain Cemetery. That was the 2nd year after I resigned. He died because of me. Before I resigned, I had taken down a small to medium-sized criminal organization. I personally sent their leader to his execution. Because I had already left and my whereabouts were unknown, the criminal organization shifted their target for revenge to my old boss, Miller. It happened on a weekend. Miller was out shopping with his family. These vicious criminals stabbed Miller and his family to death in the street. Only his 6-year-old grandson, who was in the restroom, survived. The case caused a huge sensation. Higher-ups were furious, and in less than 3 days, all involved perpetrators were rounded up. At that time, Miller was only 6 months away from retirement, from living a peaceful life. The one who should have died was me. I wanted to find Miller's grandson, hoping to make amends as best I could, but I couldn't find him. I heard he was adopted by relatives and left the city. At that moment, I finally understood what a terrible mistake I had made. I was a sinner, the one who caused Miller's death. The spirit that had sustained me shattered overnight. I was like a walking corpse. Finally, with my wife's encouragement, I returned to the police department as a consultant. If I had something to do, I wouldn't sink into despair. And it was true. Not long after, a serial killer appeared in the city. The killer often struck on rainy nights, targeting young women, and was dubbed the Rainy Night Butcher. My superiors demanded the case be solved as quickly as possible. I threw myself into it, with no time for self-pity. Often, I wouldn't get home until nearly dawn. The lights in the house would still be on. My wife would be waiting for me on the sofa. I'd say, feeling bad, "You don't have to wait up for me. Get some rest." "I can't sleep when I'm home alone," my wife would shake her head. I looked at the date. It's been almost a month. Is Mandy not coming home this week either? That girl's busy too, preparing for a debate competition with her classmates. My wife explained, college life, you know, lots of activities. I felt a bit uneasy. I reminded her, talk to her during the day. Tell her not to go out at night recently. There's a serial killer targeting young women. It's not safe. My wife nodded, understanding. As the investigation progressed, we determined that the Rainy Night Butcher's operating area was around the university town. At this rate, the killer would soon be apprehended. Taking advantage of a rare bit of free time, I went to village. Amidst a pile of ruins, I found the familiar spot. Another 20 years had passed. Under the rubble, I indeed found a decomposed body. But this time, the warning was even shorter than the previous two. It was just one word, but it filled me with extreme unease and fear: Mandy. Mandy? Connecting it to recent events, the serial killer, the university town. The business school Mandy attended was one of the universities in the university town. Could this be related? My heart lurched. I quickly tried to video call Mandy. She declined the video call and called me back instead, her tone impatient. Dad, what is it? The background noise on the call was very loud, with thumping, energetic music. I asked, where are you? Out with friends. I frowned slightly. Are you at a bar? It's a friend's birthday, we're celebrating at a bar. Mandy said, I know what you're going to say. I'll be home early, and I'll be careful. Alright, you and Mom just take care of yourselves. If there's nothing else, I'm hanging up. Before I could reply, I heard the dial tone. I shook my head helplessly. This girl had gotten quite rebellious since starting college. The next day, after much thought, I still felt uneasy about Mandy and decided to go to her school to check on her. As for the body in village, I expected this case, like the others, would end without a resolution. Downstairs at her dorm, a few girls greeted me. I'd met them at the beginning of the semester. They were Mandy's roommates. I asked, girls, have you seen my Mandy? Sir, hasn't she gone home? One of the girls asked. Mandy took leave. She hasn't been to class for several days. You haven't seen her at all these past few days? My expression turned serious. The girls all shook their heads. I quickly called Mandy several times, but no one answered. Luckily, her roommates told me about a bar she might have gone to. As evening approached, I finally spotted Mandy. A light rain was falling. She and another young girl were walking down an alley, supporting each other. I was just about to call out to her when I suddenly stopped short. About 10 meters behind them, a man in a hooded sweatshirt was furtively following them. That back view. It was identical to the serial killer caught on surveillance footage. After contacting the police department, I quickly followed. Freeze, police! Seeing the man getting closer to Mandy and her friend, I had no choice but to rush out, shouting, Mandy, you too, run. The man slowly turned around, a knowing smile on his face. Sam, you're here. You know me? I kept my composure, using my eyes to signal Mandy and her friend to run. But Mandy didn't move. To my utter disbelief, she slit the throat of the girl next to her. A splash of crimson spurted out. If you go back on your word, I'll haunt you even as a ghost. After saying this to the man, before I could even react, Mandy slit her own throat. I felt like I'd plunged into an icy abyss, my mind reeling. Why was this happening? The man clutched his stomach, laughing maniacally. Like a madman, I rushed forward, tackled him to the ground, and choked him, screaming, I'll kill you. Ha ha ha. Cough, cough. The man didn't struggle, his face full of scorn. Go on, Sam. You killed my whole family. Kill me too, and the Miller family line ends. Come on. You're Miller's. My voice trembled. I'm his grandson, Leo. The man made no attempt to hide the hatred on his face. You got tipped off back then, didn't you? Ran faster than anyone. You coward, you let my grandpa and his family take the fall for you. You have 4 lives on your conscience. As if struck by lightning, I snatched my hands back and stumbled to the ground. No, it wasn't like that. It wasn't. Police sirens wailed, growing closer, followed by the sound of urgent footsteps. Police! Stop! Leo picked up Mandy's knife and lunged at me. Just as it was about to pierce my heart, he suddenly changed its trajectory, stabbing me in the abdomen. I yelled, "Don't shoot!" Bang! A gunshot rang out, my ears roaring. Leo fell straight down. I promised Mandy I wouldn't kill you. Blood foamed at his lips, his voice barely a whisper. Death is too good for you. I want you to live a life worse than death. I sat there, as if I had died along with them. Afterward, the police found Mandy's suicide note. Combined with other evidence, the full picture of the case emerged. The perpetrators of the serial killings were Leo and Mandy. Leo, due to the tragic death of his family and the misfortunes of his upbringing, developed an antisocial personality. He believed I was responsible for his family's demise and sought revenge against me. So, after Mandy started college, he began to get close to her. When the time was right, Leo used drugs to set Mandy up, causing her to unintentionally kill someone. Mandy was terrified and didn't dare tell me or her mother about it. Leo seized the opportunity to drag her down with him. Under his instigation, the two of them went on to kill several more people. One wrong step led to another. I used to be a cop, now a police consultant. I'd spent decades fighting criminals. Now my daughter was a serial killer. What would I do? This was Leo's revenge on me. Mandy knew Leo was manipulating her, but it was too late. She begged Leo to spare me, her inadequate father. Leo promised her that if they killed one more person, he wouldn't kill me. After killing the last person, Mandy, under immense psychological pressure, chose to end her own life. At the end of her suicide note, she wrote 2 lines, "Mom and Dad, I'm sorry. Don't be sad. Live well." After that, our family shattered. The following month, my wife and I divorced. For a long time, I had no news of her. When I finally heard about her again, it was from her sister, telling me she had passed away. She had cut her wrists, ending her life. In this world, I was completely alone. I too had thought about suicide, but when I put the knife to my neck, I could never bring myself to do it. Because of fear. Not fear of death, but fear of facing those who had passed. My father, mother, Miller and his family, my wife and daughter. If I died like this, how could I face them? And so, I just kept on living, barely. In this empty world, I was a lost soul with nowhere to go. I was a sinner, and I needed to accept the punishment of solitude. In a daze, I lived to be 88. That was the 4th 20-year cycle. But that year, Nomi appeared in village. According to the 20-year pattern, I thought, perhaps I wouldn't live to be over 100. So, there was no warning from the future. I also realized that even if there was a warning, I wouldn't run from it. My experiences over the years had taught me that if you escape one disaster, another will be waiting for you. In the grand scheme of things, everything is fated. Every day after that, I lived as if it were my last, always waiting for death to come. But day by day, I somehow made it to 108. Yes, I lived to the 5th 20-year cycle. One evening that year, countless colorful butterflies enveloped me, a dazzling torrent. They spoke in unison, "You have one chance to travel back 20 years. Do you choose to go?" I smiled and shook my head. Go back 20 years? What could I change? The butterflies spoke again, "You have one chance to travel back 20 years. Do you choose to go?" I still shook my head. When they asked for the third time, a final thought occurred to me. I asked, "Can I choose an earlier time?" The butterflies hesitated for a moment, then said in unison, "Yes, but if you choose that, your life will end at 108 years. No problem." Countless butterflies flapped their wings, forming a time tunnel. My past experiences rewound before my eyes like a movie, finally stopping in a cheerful-looking countryside. 2003. I had just turned 8 that year. A bright light flashed. When I opened my eyes again, the familiar smell of yellow mud filled my nostrils, the smell of an earthen brick house. Outside the window, the moonlight was cold, spilling onto the ground. Time flow within the portal is chaotic. Please exit immediately. A voice sounded in my ear. I quickly took a step forward. The time portal, it turned out, was located in the old house's storage room. In a daze, my hand brushed against a nearby cabinet. Before long, the storage room door opened, and a middle-aged man walked in, his tone unfriendly. "At your age, still stealing things?" The moment I saw him, tears welled up in my eyes. "Dad!" My dad was startled, looking at me warily. "Are you crazy? I'm your son, Sam. I've traveled back from the future." I quickly said, "Last week, you and I went to the creek to catch crabs, but we only caught 2 small fish. We didn't catch any crabs. The only one we saw was a soft-shelled one. Your secret stash of money, hidden on top of the wardrobe, probably fell to the bottom. You should get it now. Otherwise, Mom will see that $200 when she sweeps tomorrow." Hearing this, my dad looked suspicious, then asked, "In the future, are you doing okay?" I didn't answer, just said, "I can't tell you about the future. It might change history." Hearing that, my dad didn't ask any more questions. He just said, "Are you back for a reason?" I made wrong choices in the past, and now I want to make up for them. I glanced instinctively at the portal, then smiled and urged him, "Just pretend you never saw me. Go back to sleep." My dad frowned slightly, turned to leave, then turned back. "So, are you doing okay in the future?" "I'm doing great," I said. "You've always wrinkled your nose when you lie, ever since you were little." Dad gave me a deep look. "I won't ask any more. If you need my help with anything, just say the word. I believe you can make the right choices, son." With that, he turned and left. I sighed and looked out the window. My 8-year-old self was at the window, eyes wide, looking in. I walked over to him and said, "Sam, never go back to the past." As soon as I said it, I felt it wasn't right. So I took out a hypnosis device and made him forget this memory. For me, coming from the year 2103, technology was incredibly advanced. A little trick like this was nothing. For the next 3 days, I wandered around the village, visiting many old acquaintances. After so many years, it was like a final farewell. After doing all this, I returned to the storage room, erased all traces of myself and Dad from the scene, and then stepped into the portal. Using technology, I flawlessly bricked up an extra wall in the storage room. Essentially, the portal was sealed inside the wall. If anyone else traveled through, they would be trapped inside the portal, quickly eroded and killed by the temporal turbulence within. This was the purpose of my journey. If my future self hadn't interfered, would the subsequent chain reactions have occurred? Would my life have been different? Feeling the wash of temporal energy, my body rapidly aged and decayed. Dying like this. It's okay too. Suddenly, a lightning bolt shot through my mind. Despair instantly consumed me. No, wrong. It was all wrong. An immense fear swallowed me whole. The night I traveled back, wasn't that exactly what my 8-year-old self experienced? Following this logic, the me of this timeline, at 28, would encounter the 48-year-old me who traveled back. I had sealed the portal. So, the 48-year-old me, before dying, left the message, "Do not investigate this case." I didn't heed the warning, which led to Dad's suicide. Going further back, Dad's embezzlement and the statue he erected on the site of the storage room, perhaps it wasn't out of guilt or repentance, but to help me seal the portal. He must have discovered the problem with the wall and the portal. He wanted to cover up the truth for me. Demolition was inevitable back then. If the house was torn down, the portal would be exposed. And the village square construction focused on practicality. They would install exercise equipment for the elderly, but those facilities wouldn't hide the portal. He had no choice but to embezzle construction funds and use it as an excuse to erect the statue. My dad killed himself to hide this. Because he knew that if the me of that timeline found out, the future would be altered again. He believed the choices I made were correct, so he concealed it all. Then, after Dad's suicide, at 48, I encountered the warning from my 68-year-old self and chose to believe it. I resolutely resigned. And the final result was my 108-year-old self returning to when I was 8. Under the influence of the butterfly effect, the initial tiny change had long since steered events towards a different outcome. And the very first change was my 108-year-old self traveling back to when I was 8. I didn't want my future me to affect the current me's life, but in reality, the 108-year-old me traveling back had already changed it. The cause became the effect, and the effect became the cause. It's a closed loop, a dead end. I understood it all, but my life was already at its end. Everything is fate. Nothing can be changed. More and more colorful butterflies flew towards me, landing on me one by one. Their voices were a jumbled mess. See? Even if you try your hardest, you can't live this life well. Try as many times as you want, you can't escape the final outcome. It's all destiny. A boring life, a tedious world. Better not to have come at all. My final consciousness faded. Gradually, a hazy consciousness reformed, becoming a colorful butterfly, following millions of other butterflies towards an unknown destination. In the vast darkness, countless butterflies danced. One butterfly was me, and yet it felt like all the butterflies were me. During this aimless flight, I pondered a new question. If I only had one chance to travel through time, then what about the me I encountered at 28, 48, and 68? Until, during the flight, new butterflies continually joined us, and I understood. They came from other places, but they were all me. They were all named Sam, just living Sam's life in different ways. Those different places were called parallel worlds. In a daze, I remembered a detail. The night my 2103 self traveled back to 2003, the child I saw at the window. My 8-year-old self, he was holding toilet paper. In my memory, I got up that night to pee. I didn't take any paper. The only way this could have happened was if he was going for a number 2 that night. The paper wasn't used up. The two of us. We weren't from the same world at all. Realizing this, I felt a sense of relief. This was at least much better than being trapped in an infinitely repeating loop, wasn't it? Beep. In a clean, white room, a pregnant woman lay on a bed. In front of her were a red light and a green light. As an alarm blared, the red light suddenly lit up. Beside the hospital bed, a doctor in a white coat shook his head, looking apologetic. "I'm very sorry, madam, but your child cannot be born." The pregnant woman became agitated. "Why?" The pregnant woman's husband pushed open the door. "You mean our child is refusing to be born?" "Yes." The doctor explained patiently. "With the assistance of the Temporal Management Bureau, we used an exhaustive method to allow your child to experience every possible life they might live after birth, across trillions of parallel worlds. After experiencing all these lives, your child is not satisfied and has therefore rejected the request to be born. The pregnant woman's eyes reddened. She pleaded, "We just want a child. Isn't there any other way?" The doctor sighed helplessly. Article 3 of the birth regulations clearly states that newborns have the right to know what their life will be like after birth. In layman's terms, they get to preview their life script. Only if they are satisfied will they come into this world. The pregnant woman became distraught. If you know everything, what's the point of life? Rest assured, before birth, these memories are erased. The doctor continued, if you still desperately want a child, you can try to conceive again in 6 months. The husband did his best to comfort his wife, then asked the doctor, what about this child now? What will you do with him? Kill him? Although the child is unborn, he is still protected by law. The doctor remained patient. According to regulations, he will be sent to the cerebrum. Technicians will create a customized virtual world for him based on his preferences. In that world, he will be very happy. Hearing this, the couple said no more. They could only accept it. A few hours later, the child was removed from the wife's body. Its brain was sent to the cerebrum, where work would soon begin on customizing its virtual life. Looking at the densely packed brains in the cerebrum, the wife suddenly spoke, "Honey, do you think we might just be 2 brains in the cerebrum too?" The husband was stunned for a moment, but quickly recovered and smiled. "What are you talking about? Come on, let's go home."